Hello, my name is Maggie Henry. I'm a master's student in the Island Studies program at the University of Prince Edward Island in Canada. This is a version of my presentation that I gave recently at the 17th International Small Island Studies Association ISISA conference in June 2021. I'm coming to you today from Ebiguet in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, where I am a settler. And my research focuses on Ukdamguk, the island of Newfoundland, which I'd also like to acknowledge as the ancestral homelands and unceded territory of both the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq people. So, we talk about sense of place and connection to place a lot in our research, in our work, even just in our everyday life. But what does that mean? What does connection to place look like? That's the central focus of my ongoing thesis research, which examines themes of place in the craft beer community on the island of Newfoundland. So this all started by accident, as a lot of the best things do. A couple of years ago, I was procrastinating while working on an unrelated research paper and noticed a theme of place-related beer names and brewery names, especially on the island of Newfoundland, and thought, there's something going on here. At that time, Newfoundland was going through a major craft beer boom. Between 2016 and 2019, they went from 3 craft breweries to 12 in 3 years. And now there's 17 on the island, and 1 in Labrador, and a couple more in the works as well. And it gets juicier. The majority of these new breweries weren't opening up in cities, as is typical elsewhere. They were rural. And of course, the brewery names and beer names were positively oozing in themes of place. Place names, local language, heritage, fishing, mining, folklore, historical moments, the works. And so it began. And it's been quite a journey. As I said, this began 2 years ago, and honestly, for most of that time, I've been completely stuck. I knew there was something here, and I was fascinated and excited about it, but I couldn't for the life of me figure out where to start and what route to take. Adding to that, I found that every time I explained my project to somebody, they saw it as something different, and they were all right. The thing with a rich topic like this is that it fits into a lot of different boxes, and there's no wrong answer or direction to take it in, which can be really exciting. But as someone whose neurodiverse brain sometimes makes it really difficult to decide where to draw the line because it's all interesting and relevant and connected, this presented a major challenge for me. How do I write this thing? 140 pages of 2-dimensional text with academic rigor and structure, chapters, without leaving anything out? I know they say the best thesis is a completed one, but that still requires you to be able to start. About a month and a half ago, I had a series of light bulb moments, and suddenly things started falling into place. I remembered that this multiplicity, the fact that this topic and all of its pieces mean something different to each person, is what makes it so rich and juicy. And once I realized that I could and needed to embrace the power of these simultaneous stories, the project began to take shape. So the short version of what I'm up to is I'm undertaking a creative thesis research project that engages the figure of the island as both model and metaphor, examining themes of place embedded in the craft beers of Newfoundland while emphasizing the value and potential of relational approaches. Okay, but what does all that mean? So I've collected the names of 135 flagship beers from the 17 active breweries on the island of Newfoundland. I'm in the process of doing a thematic content analysis on these names to identify key themes and clusters. I'm then going to engage mapping, likely a combination of GIS data mapping and our creative reproduction of existing maps to play with translating this representation of sense of place visually. And then using textile techniques like stitching and embroidery, for example, I will reiterate this mapping again onto an existing Newfoundland patchwork quilt from my childhood, which I have right here. And of course, there will be a written component as well. I'll come back to the beer aspect in a few minutes because people are always really excited when they hear that I'm working with beer. But first, let's go back to the start and dig into the theoretical framework a bit. How does islandness fit into all of this? First, I think it's important to recognize that islandness is and can be a lot of things and is interpreted and engaged in different ways in different projects. To some, islandness is quite literal and tangible, the state of being an island, one which is often seen as isolated, self-contained. On the other hand, islandness might be something you didn't even know how to word if it's a lived experience. While I do engage the island as a geographical entity in this work, I'm more so coming at islandness from a different angle, looking at the island as a generative figure of ongoing becoming and a site of relational entanglement. There's been a relational turn in island studies recently, and in the world more broadly too. And this, alongside an increasing rejection of modern linear frameworks in favor of more complex relationalities, has brought islands to the fore as intensely relational spaces. In reality and in nature, everything is inter and intra-related. And in recognizing and understanding islands as generative, productive sites where relations play out particularly intensely and visibly, they become central to understanding the changing nature of both our world and of the way that we think about it and within it. Thinking with islands in this way enables alternative forms of thought and practice. This approach is central to the Anthropocene Islands initiative and agenda, which is, to put it very simply, thinking about the ways that we think about and with islands in the current Anthropocene age. So thinking about thinking. I'm not going to go into this agenda in detail here, but if this does get you thinking, I encourage you to check out the Anthropocene Islands website, which is anthropoceneislands.online, or the new book, which just came out, well, at the time of recording, just came out last week by Jonathan Pugh and David Chandler, and you can find all the information on their website there. So with all of this in mind, the current project presents the metaphorical entangled island of place plus craft beer plus Newfoundland as a figure through which to better understand the relationality of place identity, both on this literal island and beyond. Here's the tip of the iceberg version of what I'm up to. So first, putting forth beer names as representations of connection to place, and in turn mapping that thematic data, allows us to think about the relationship between place and identity in Newfoundland in a more graspable way. What does that look like? And it shouldn't matter that you have to see something or hear something for it to make more sense, but it just kind of works that way sometimes. If you hear about something or you see something, it just kind of hits you in a different way. By engaging traditional craft practice and reiterating these findings in and onto a textile form, data visualization then becomes data storytelling, imbuing even further layers of meaning and connection. In adding this literal layer of meaning onto an existing literal patchwork, as opposed to creating something new from scratch, the textile piece itself becomes a site of regenerative recrafting, mirroring or even reiterating the patchy anthropocenic reading of the island as a figure of generative ongoing becoming. Stepping back, the project unfolds to reveal that it is itself an island, a figure of what I am calling recursive islandness, reminiscent of a geographically recursive island, so an island within an island, or more theoretically of Roberts and Stevens's infinite island, or Benitez Rojo's repeating island. This recursive entangled island then, both as model and metaphor, pushes back against modern frameworks of reasoning, embracing and further demonstrating the depth, power, and potential of relational approaches, and giving a nod to the generative, ongoing becoming of the figure of the island in all of its forms and readings. So what about the beer? The analytical jumping off point of this project positions themes of place in beer names as indicators of connection to place, focusing specifically on craft breweries on the island of Newfoundland. This approach is supported by an understanding of craft beer brands as rich sources of themes of place, and of islands as spaces of heightened sense of connection to place. To give you an idea of what I'm finding so far, here are some preliminary results. So as I said, I'm analyzing 135 flagship beer names from 17 craft breweries. The most common themes overall are specific place, which could include towns, landmarks, and roads, for example, Newfoundland language, which is a whole other thesis in itself, and bodies of water. Also prominent are weather, maritime industry, Newfoundland music, and historical moments. While playing with the ideas of how to map or represent these themes, it all came back to the power of simultaneous stories. Each of these theme clusters conveys something different about the island and all of its relationships. And I found myself thinking and playing with loss and abundance a lot in the last few weeks. So I began tinkering with different maps and data to see if it sparked anything, creating overlays of weather patterns, brewery locations, ocean currents, waterways, density of cod in 1850, density of cod in 2005, and communities that were abandoned due to a controversial government resettlement program that began in the 1950s, resulting in over 600 resettled and abandoned communities. And then I realized, this is Newfoundland. This defines it in a sense. And all of these, settlement and migration, abundance and annihilation, wind and the waves, we can't think of these as distinct, as an archive or a legacy or an outside force. They're all very much part of the ongoing here and now. There is no past, no away. When you look at these characters and begin to think about and with them, it becomes difficult to approach time in a linear way and to distance ourselves from the past, or indeed from the future. And the island holds all of this and amplifies it. Newfoundland author Michael Crummey alluded to this in his keynote at the ISISA conference when he said, "There is no such thing as real Newfoundland, trapped or sealed in amber. Newfoundland has always been in progress." So in addition to my textile project, in the last week or so, I've been embracing and playing with this haunting multiplicity through digital mediums, playing with layering, transparency, audio, still images, and video. Again, that's another project and discussion entirely, but I've got a taste of it here for you, and I've started sharing a bit of it on Twitter, so you can find me there if you'd like to see what I'm up to. As I was sitting down to start putting this presentation together a couple weeks ago, I popped on an audiobook that I've been meaning to listen to for a while called Wayfinding: The Science and Mystery of How Humans Navigate the World by M.R. O'Connor. I'd like to leave you with something from the introduction. She writes, "There are different ways to react to being lost. Panic is one. Another is to surrender and allow the fact that you've misplaced yourself to change the way you experience the world." And I couldn't think of a better way to frame this project because, as I said at the start, it was only when I stopped trying to fit all of this into modern linear frameworks and instead began to embrace the rich, patchy multiplicity that everything suddenly started falling into place. So just as recursive islandness keeps emerging within the project, it also emerges in the process of the project in this recursive multiplicity. At each layer, each dimension of this tangle, it means something different to everyone. The island itself means something different to everyone, and so do each of its rocks, its lakes, its bogs, its storms. That rock that has a beer named after it, that rock holds different meaning to different people. And so that beer that carries its name will as well. And all of these meanings and all of their depth coexist at the same time. And I find that so exciting. There's so much richness, power, and fun to be had when we play in these waves. Through alternative approaches to thought and practice like this, we can exist, think, and relate differently as researchers, writers, storytellers, community members, islanders, earthlings, placelings, and any combination of these, sharing and exploring together in a way that enables connection and understanding at a whole other level. This project is still ongoing and continues to be quite soul-filling and inspiring adventure for me, and I hope that this might have sparked something in you too. Thank you for joining me on this leg of the journey.